Every year around this time, the nights start to change. The air feels colder, quieter. Streets that seemed familiar in daylight don't look the same once the sun goes down. That's when Halloween feels closest. Tonight's video brings the stories together. 21 real Halloween horrors made for nights like this. So settle in, keep the lights low, and let's begin. Borrowed costumes. Halloween in my neighborhood usually wraps up early. By 10 o'clock, the porch lights are off, the little kids are in bed, and only the older ones are still wandering the streets with pillowcases that sag from the weight of candy. That night felt no different. I had just started to relax, sitting on the couch with the lights dimmed when the doorbell rang again. It was later than I expected, close to 10:30. But I figured a few stragglers were squeezing in one last round. I grabbed the candy bowl and opened the door. There were 4 of them. Teenagers, taller than the kids I'd seen earlier, and each of them holding a pillowcase. Their costumes were simple, almost lazy. A cracked scream mask, a ripped vampire cape, and a couple of old plastic masks that looked like they had been pulled from the bottom of a closet. They didn't talk much. One of them muttered, "Trick or treat," under his breath. But the others just stood there in silence. I dropped a few pieces of candy into each bag and waited for the usual "thank you," but none came. They turned together and walked back down the driveway, slow and silent. Something about them bothered me. I didn't know why, but something about the way they stood there, the way they didn't speak, stuck in my head. I told myself I was being paranoid and shut the door. Later, after the house was quiet and the kids were in bed, I went out to the garage to put some things away. That's when it hit me. The cape, the mask. They weren't just random costumes. They were mine. 2 weeks earlier, I had boxed up a pile of old Halloween junk, decorations, costumes my kids had outgrown, things we didn't use anymore, and shoved it against the wall in the garage. The torn cape, the scream mask with the crack across the chin. They were both in that box. I walked straight to the corner, pulled the flaps open, and felt my stomach drop. The box was half empty. Costumes were gone, and the props that were left were scattered across the floor. The side door of the garage was unlocked. They hadn't come dressed for Halloween. They had gone through my garage. They had taken what they wanted, put it on, and then walked right up to my front door so I could hand them candy. I just stood there, staring at that open box. My chest felt tight. How long had they been there? Had they only taken costumes? Or had they gone further? Had they stepped inside the house while we were distracted at the front door with other kids? I barely slept that night, and when I finally did check the camera footage the next morning, it made everything worse. The 4 of them stood in a line on my porch, silent, staring through their masks. The one in the scream mask tilted his head back, just enough for the camera to catch the empty eye holes fixed directly on the lens. I can't explain why, but I swear it didn't look random. It looked deliberate. That box in the garage has been taped shut ever since. But every Halloween, when the porch light goes off and the neighborhood grows quiet, I find myself picturing them again. 4 kids in masks and capes that belonged to me, standing at the door, waiting to see if I'd realize it wasn't just a trick. Because if they were bold enough to take costumes out of my garage and show up wearing them, then I can't stop wondering what else they took that I haven't discovered yet. The candy trade. When I was a kid, Dumping out your Halloween bag at the end of the night was almost better than trick-or-treating itself. You'd come home, pour everything onto the floor, and sit there sorting it into piles. Chocolate bars in one stack, lollipops in another, and all the boring hard candy shoved to the side. My sister and I always argued over trades, and my mom would hover, making sure nothing looked tampered with. One Halloween, I was about 10 years old. I came back from making the rounds with a group of friends. It had been a long night. We must have hit 30 houses, maybe more. I dumped my candy onto the carpet, and right away, my mom noticed something that didn't fit. It was wrapped in plain silver foil, no brand, no bright wrapper, just foil, twisted at both ends. She peeled it back, and inside was a small chocolate disc. No markings, no logo, nothing to show where it came from. She asked me where I got it. I honestly couldn't remember. We'd been running up to porches all night, laughing and pushing each other, bags filling so fast, I wasn't paying attention to what went in. I shrugged. She frowned, set it aside, and told me not to eat it. But I had one already. I didn't think much of it. I had more candy than I could eat in a month. The next day, I woke up sick. My stomach hurt. I couldn't keep anything down. And my mom said 2 of the kids I'd gone trick-or-treating with were sick too. When the parents compared, they all found the same thing. Each of us had at least one of those plain foil chocolates in our bags. That's when everyone started asking which house was giving them out. None of us could pin it down. A couple of kids thought maybe it came from a bowl on a porch with a little sign that said "Take one." Someone else swore it was dropped straight into their bag by a man at a White House on the corner. But when the parents retraced the route, nobody could agree. We had the candy in our bags, but no one remembered who had given it to us. The police were even called, but there wasn't much they could do without a clear answer. Their advice was just, don't eat unmarked candy again. That was the end of it, officially. But I still think about it every October. The way we all ended up with the same strange candy, and how not one of us could remember where it came from. That's what unsettles me most. Not that it made us sick, not that it slipped past the parents checking bags, but that a handful of kids could carry something home, eat it, and not one of us could say who handed it over. Every time I see kids dump their candy out on the floor, I think about that silver wrapper and how easy it was for something dangerous to get mixed in, right under everyone's nose. The house that lured kids inside. I was 12 years old the Halloween this happened. Back then, trick-or-treating always felt safe. The streets were full of kids. Parents walked a few steps behind with flashlights, and as long as a porch light was on, you could expect candy waiting at the door. That night, I was out with 3 friends. We'd already been going for hours, bags heavy enough that our arms ached, when we turned down a street I didn't know well. Most of the houses were dark, but halfway down, we saw one with its light still on. There were no decorations, no pumpkins on the steps, nothing to make it look festive, just the light and the front door slightly open. We slowed down. At first, it looked like no one was home. Then we noticed a bowl sitting just inside the doorway. Before we could decide whether to go up, the door opened wider and a man appeared. He wasn't dressed up. No mask, no costume. He looked at us and said, very casually, one at a time, "Come in and pick what you want." The 4 of us just stood there, staring. Nobody else had asked kids to go inside. Usually people just held the bowl out or let you grab a handful on the porch. None of us wanted to move. but one of my friends gave a nervous laugh and stepped forward. He crossed the threshold, and the man closed the door behind him. We stayed on the porch, waiting. At first, we thought it would be quick, but a minute passed, then another. The laughter of kids on the street felt far away compared to how quiet that porch was. I remember shifting from one foot to the other, trying to convince myself it was fine. But the longer it went on, the worse it felt. Finally, the door opened. My friend stepped back out. His face was pale, and he held his bag tight against his chest. He didn't say a word. The man leaned against the doorframe, looked at the rest of us, and asked, "Next." We didn't answer. We didn't even look at him. All four of us bolted down the steps and didn't stop running until we were blocks away. When we finally caught our breath under a streetlight, we asked our friend what happened in there. He shook his head and kept saying the same thing. "Don't go in there." That's all he ever told us. We never reported it. We never told our parents. But every Halloween since, when I see a porch light shining at a house with no decorations, I think about that man standing in the doorway, about how easily it could have been one of us who went in and didn't come back out. Halloween ends the same way every year. The lights go out, the kids go home, and the streets go quiet. Trick or treat after midnight. I was 13 that Halloween. At that age, I already felt too old to be out trick or treating, but my little brother begged me to take him. My parents agreed, gave me a flashlight, and told me I was in charge. So I threw on a hoodie, and we went out into the neighborhood. At first it was fun. The streets were packed with people. Houses were decorated. Lights were on, and you could hear kids shouting trick or treat from every direction. My brother ran up and down driveways, dragging his candy bag, while I stayed closer to the street and waited for him. It felt busy, alive, safe. We kept going long after most of the kids went home. By the time we started back, most of the porches were dark. One by one, the houses shut down for the night. The noise disappeared too. It was just the two of us, walking down an empty street, our bags stuffed full of candy. When we got home, we dumped everything on the kitchen table and started sorting. Candy everywhere, wrappers crinkling, my brother bragging about his haul. I remember feeling relieved we made it back, even though it was close to midnight. That's when someone knocked on the door. It was quick and sharp. 3 knocks. I figured it was a late group of kids. I opened it right away. 2 kids were standing on the porch, masks on, but no candy bags, no pumpkins. Their horns were empty. I waited for them to say, "Trick or treat." They didn't. They just stood there, silent. Something about it didn't feel right. I closed the door slowly, locked it, and told my brother to head upstairs. He asked what was wrong, and I told him to just go. A few minutes later, another knock. This time it was slow and heavy. 4 knocks. Silence. 4 more. I crept to the window by the door and pulled the curtain just enough to peek out. The porch was empty. Driveway empty too, but the knocks kept going. Slow, steady, like someone was right there, even though I couldn't see them. I didn't open the door again. I just stood in the dark, frozen, listening until it finally stopped. The next morning, the porch was covered in frost. That's when I saw the prints. Not shoes, not boots, bare feet. 2 sets, standing right where those masked kids had been. The last candy bag. I was 16 that Halloween, and my parents were going out for the night. That left me in charge of the house and, of course, the candy bowl. At first, I didn't mind. It actually felt kind of fun to hand out candy on my own. The evening started busy. The doorbell seemed like it never stopped ringing. Groups of kids came in waves, superheroes, witches, tiny monsters with glowing plastic masks. Every time I opened the door, the porch filled with laughter and footsteps, and I could hear voices carrying down the street from other houses. It was non-stop for a while, and my candy bowl was emptying fast. As the night dragged on, things slowed down. By 10 o'clock, it was mostly quiet. An occasional knock here and there, but nothing like before. And by 11, the street outside had gone completely still. I remember standing by the window, looking out, and noticing that every other porch light on the block had already been turned off. Ours was the only one still shining. I stood there debating whether to switch ours off too when I heard it. A knock at the door. Not the doorbell, just a slow, steady knock. I opened the door, expecting maybe a couple of older kids trying to squeeze out one last round of candy. Instead, I saw her. It was just one girl, standing completely still on the porch. She looked maybe 12. She wore a plain mask, nothing fancy, and in her hands, she held a pillowcase. I grabbed a handful of candy from the bowl and dropped it in. I expected the bag to sink, heavy from the night's haul, but it didn't. It barely moved at all. The bag was nearly empty, like no one else had given her anything. I hesitated, waiting for her to say something. Trick or treat. Thanks. A laugh. Anything. But she didn't. She just stood there, silent. The longer it went on, the more uncomfortable I felt. Finally, I closed the door and locked it. I tried to brush it off and sat back on the couch. But the unease stayed with me, a knot twisting in my stomach. A few minutes passed, maybe 10 at most, and my curiosity got the better of me. I got up and pressed my eye to the peephole. The porch was empty, but the pillowcase was still there. It was standing upright, right where the girl had been holding it. Only now it looked heavy, full. The fabric bulged like it was packed with candy. I froze, staring through the peephole, trying to make sense of it. Finally, I opened the door quickly and stepped outside. The night air hit me cold, and I looked up and down the street. Not a sound, not a single person in sight, just dark houses and an empty road, and the bag sitting there on the porch, stuffed full. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Something about it felt wrong, like if I reached down and opened it, I wouldn't like what I found. So I left it. I closed the door, locked it, and tried to ignore it. All night, the thought of it sat in the back of my head. A bag full of candy, left behind by a girl who never spoke a single word. When I finally worked up the nerve to check again in the morning, it was gone. No bag, no candy, nothing left on the porch. To this day, I can't explain what happened. The mask that wasn't a costume. I was 17 that Halloween, walking home from a party. It wasn't far, maybe a 20-minute walk, and I'd done it 100 times before. The night was cold, and most of the houses I passed were already dark, their decorations swaying in the wind. A few porch lights still flickered, but the rush of kids had already died down. The streets were quiet, just the sound of leaves crunching under my shoes. That's when I noticed him. Across the street, walking in the same direction I was. At first, I didn't think much of it. People were always out late on Halloween. But then I realized what caught my attention. The mask. It was one of those cheap plastic ones you get at the dollar store. Thin, shiny, with the elastic band around the back of the head. It wasn't scary, not by itself, but something about the way he wore it. Plain clothes, no costume, just the mask, made my stomach tighten. I told myself it was nothing, probably just someone walking home too. But after a few blocks, I started noticing the pattern. Whenever I slowed down, he slowed down too. When I sped up, his pace matched mine. He never crossed the street, never got closer, never fell behind. Just always there, walking parallel to me. I turned a corner. So did he. I kept glancing out of the corner of my eye, hoping maybe he'd turn off or disappear into a house. But he didn't. Block after block, he was still there. By the time I reached my own street, my chest felt tight. That's when I noticed something else. He wasn't carrying anything, just his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. I tried to act normal, but my pace picked up. My house was only a few houses down now. I forced myself not to break into a run, but every step felt heavier, every sound louder in my ears. The second I hit my driveway, I gave in. I sprinted to the door, fumbling with my keys, hands shaking as I jammed one into the lock. I shoved the door open, slammed it behind me, and threw the lock shut. Inside, I leaned against the door, gasping, my heart pounding. My mom looked up from the couch and laughed when I told her. She said it was just Halloween. Probably some kid trying to freak people out. I wanted to believe her. But the next morning, police cars were parked at the end of our street. Neighbors were standing outside in their jackets. I asked what had happened, and that's when I learned a house, just a few blocks away, had been broken into during the night. The description of the suspect was simple. A man in a cheap plastic mask. These are just 3 stories, but they prove one thing. You don't need ghosts or monsters for horror. Sometimes, the scariest part of all is who you might meet along the way. Harvest Moon Haunting. I grew up in Willow Creek, a town that lived for its Halloween corn maze. Every October, families would line up, kids laughing, parents sipping cider, everyone pretending they weren't scared. But there were whispers. People said the maze wasn't safe on Halloween night. Old-timers told stories about kids who went in and didn't come out. Nobody could prove it, but the fear stuck. I was 16 when my friends dared me to try it. Go in alone, just once. I laughed it off, grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside. The air changed immediately. Outside, I'd heard music, chatter, car horns. Inside, it was dead silent. The corn rose above my head, blocking the sky. My light carved out a little circle, but beyond it, everything was shadows. I walked a few turns and already felt like I was lost. Then I heard footsteps behind me, clear as day. I whipped around with the flashlight. Nothing but corn. I told myself it was the stalks settling, but then they came again. Heavier, closer. I sped up. The path split left and right. I went left. Wrong choice. A dead end. I spun back, panicked, and nearly dropped the flashlight. That's when I heard it. A voice. A child's whisper. This way. I froze. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it would burst. I swept the light across the corn. No one there. But the whisper came again. Closer. Right by my ear. Hurry. I bolted. Turn after turn, the maze stretched on. I couldn't find my way out. Then I noticed something. The dirt was covered in handprints. Dozens. Small. Childlike. Pressed deep into the soil. Some fresh. Some so old they looked fossilized. The whispers multiplied. Giggling. Calling. My light flickered, and for a split second I saw them. Figures crouched in the corn. Pale faces. Hollow eyes. Watching. Then something grabbed my ankle. Ice-cold fingers. I hit the ground hard. my flashlight clattering away. I kicked, clawed, screamed. When I finally broke free, I scrambled on all fours until I found the light. My hands came up black with wet dirt, packed under my fingernails. When I burst out of the maze, my friends stared at me like they'd seen a ghost. They said I was gone 15 minutes. My watch said 3 hours. My leg burned with bruises where those fingers had held me. I never went back. Even now, I can't stand the sound of kids laughing in the dark. It takes me straight back to that maze. The Whispering Woods incident. When I moved to Oak Haven, the warning was different. Don't go into the woods on Halloween. Locals said the forest wasn't ours, that something lived there long before us, and Halloween was when it came out. I didn't believe it. So one October night, I tested it. Flashlight, jacket, phone in my pocket. I stepped onto the old logging trail just after midnight. The deeper I went, the thicker the trees got. My light barely cut through the dark. No stars, no moon, just me and silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you feel dizzy. That's when I heard it. Whispers. Dozens of them. At first faint, then louder. They came from every direction. Left, right, ahead, behind. Male voices, female voices. Some deep, some high-pitched, all speaking at once. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer, but the voices kept moving, circling me, closer and closer. I swept the flashlight through the trees and froze. Shapes stood between the trunks, tall, thin. Faces pale and long, like stretched skin. They didn't move. But every time my light flickered, they were closer. The whispers grew sharper, clearer. They weren't outside anymore. They were inside my head. Some laughed, some begged, and one voice cut through them all. A low growl. "Stay." I bolted. The trail twisted endlessly, branches slapping my face, tearing my jacket. My lungs burned. But no matter how fast I ran, the whispers stayed with me. Some screamed, others chanted. My ears rang with it. I tripped and hit the ground. My flashlight went out. In the pitch black, something cold brushed the back of my neck. I heard that same voice, deeper now, whisper right into my ear. "You belong to us." I don't remember getting home. I woke up on my porch at dawn. Mud caked my shoes. My phone was dead, though I'd charged it before leaving. My flashlight was gone. Nobody believed me. But every Halloween since, I hear those whispers. And once, I swear I saw one of those tall figures standing at the tree line, watching my house. The trick-or-treat terror. Maplewood was picture perfect. Quiet streets, kids running around in costumes, parents waving from porches. It felt safe. Until one Halloween when I was babysitting my cousins. We went trick-or-treating for hours, then came home with bags full of candy. The kids dumped it on the table while I hung up their coats. That's when I noticed the house was freezing. Our breath came out in clouds. The furnace was running, but the cold felt unnatural, like we'd stepped into a freezer. The candy bowl slid across the table on its own. The kids gasped. I tried to laugh it off, said the table must be uneven. Then the lights flickered and went out. We sat in darkness. That's when we heard it. Breathing, slow, heavy, coming from the hallway. I whispered for the kids not to move. The breathing came closer, then footsteps, dragging, uneven, each one louder than the last. The kids clung to my arms, shaking. I gripped them tight, too scared to move. The footsteps reached the kitchen doorway, stopped. Then the front door slammed open with a deafening bang. Freezing air rushed in. Candy scattered across the floor. The kids screamed. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. That breathing was behind me now, wet, hot, rasping on my neck. My hair lifted from the air of it, and then silence. The lights flicked back on. The door was shut. The candy was neatly piled back on the table. The kids never trick-or-treated again. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I still hear that same breathing in my ear. Every town has its Halloween legends, corn mazes, dark woods, even the safety of home. But what if they aren't just stories? What if these things wait for the one night a year when the veil is thinnest, when they know we'll open the door to them? The village fire. Ireland. I studied abroad in Ireland for a semester. While most of my classmates stayed in Dublin, I chose a small rural village in the west. I thought I'd be surrounded by quiet countryside and friendly locals. And for the most part, I was. It was the kind of place where every person knew your name. Shops closed before dark. Strangers weren't common. And everyone whispered about things you weren't supposed to talk about out loud. As October crept in, I learned Halloween was different there. They didn't treat it as costumes and candy. They still called it Samhain, the night when the veil between the living and the dead thins. They spoke about it with respect, not excitement. On October 31st, the whole village gathered at the edge of the fields. I went along, curious. They built the largest bonfire I'd ever seen, stacked high with wood and brush. It was circled by a ring of stones, worn smooth, older than the village itself. I stood near the flames, the heat almost unbearable, when one of the elders leaned toward me. His hand clamped on my arm, strong for someone his age. His face was grey as stone when he whispered, "Stay outside the stones. No matter what you see, no matter who calls to you." I wanted to laugh, but the grip he had on me made it clear he wasn't joking. His eyes didn't leave mine until I nodded. Only then did he release me. The fire grew, roaring, sparks shooting up like stars being torn out of the sky. The villagers sang low chants I couldn't understand. That's when I noticed them, shapes, just beyond the firelight. At first, I thought it was villagers, circling in the fields, but the way they moved, too smooth, too silent. The flames flickered, and I saw pale faces, and then my stomach dropped. One of them looked like my grandfather. He'd been dead for years, but there he was. His face was lit in the fire's orange glow, hollow-eyed, skin stretched thin. He raised a hand, calling me closer. I felt my foot move forward, like I wasn't in control. My chest ached like I was being pulled across the stones. Then the old man's hand shot out again, yanking me back so hard I nearly fell. His voice was sharp and urgent. "That's not yours to follow." I blinked, and my grandfather's figure was gone. So were the others, just empty black fields beyond the fire. The villagers carried on like nothing had happened, singing, chanting, throwing herbs into the flames. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had come one step away from something I was never meant to see. I left Ireland a few weeks later, but every year on Halloween, I dream of that night. I see faces just beyond the firelight. I wake choking on the smell of smoke, and I wonder if I would step past the stones. Would I still be here? The October 31st Mask. Japan. I spent a year teaching English in Osaka. My students loved telling me ghost stories, Bloody Mary, Hanako-san in the bathroom, urban legends they whispered during lunch. Most of the time, they laughed when they told them. But there was one story that was different. They called her the Mask Woman. They said she only appeared once a year, on October 31st. Always at night. Always alone. She wore a porcelain mask cracked right down the middle. And if she spoke to you, you had to answer. Answer wrong, and you'd vanish. I asked what they meant by vanish, but the students just went quiet. A couple exchanged nervous glances, but no one explained. I brushed it off as another schoolyard myth. Until Halloween. That night, I stayed late grading papers. The halls grew silent. The kind of silence that feels wrong in a school. As if the building itself was holding its breath. By the time I left, it was almost midnight. The city felt strange. Quieter than usual. The air heavy, like the humidity before a storm. I cut through a narrow alley, a shortcut I'd taken dozens of times. The streetlights were dim, buzzing faintly. My footsteps echoed off the walls, sharp in the stillness. Halfway down, I froze. There was someone standing under the broken lamp at the end of the alley. A woman, perfectly still, head tilted just slightly. Her face hidden behind a porcelain mask, cracked straight down the middle. I stopped breathing. The stories flooded back. Every word my students had told me. My skin prickled as if my body knew before my mind did. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost kind. Do you think I'm pretty? I knew the story. I knew the rules. My lips barely moved as I forced the word out. Yes. For a moment, nothing. Then she stepped forward. The crack in the mask widened. Not like it was breaking, but like it was opening, stretching. Her voice dropped, distorted, like two voices speaking at once. What about now? I bolted. My body moved before I even realized. I sprinted, my shoes slamming against the pavement, the sound bouncing off the narrow walls. I didn't look back, not once. When I burst into a busier street, I finally risked it. The alley was empty. Nothing but flickering light. The next day, I told my students what happened. I expected laughter, maybe teasing, but the classroom went silent. Their faces were pale, eyes wide. One of them whispered, "You saw her. You're lucky she let you go." I never took that alley again. And I never stayed at school past dark. That was years ago. But every Halloween night, I feel the same weight in the air. I avoid alleys. I avoid empty streets. Because sometimes, when the lamps flicker, I swear I see the edge of a cracked porcelain mask waiting just beyond the light. The skeleton that followed, Mexico. I visited family in Mexico one year during Dia de los Muertos. I'd seen pictures of it online, but nothing prepared me for what it was really like. The cemeteries weren't quiet, like back home. They were alive. Families gathered at the graves of their loved ones, playing music, eating food, lighting candles. Everywhere smelled like incense and marigolds. The air was thick with smoke, but warm and welcoming. At first, it felt beautiful, comforting even. Like the living and the dead were sharing the same space for one night. People kept adding candles to the graves, and by the time I finally left, it was past midnight. The crowds had thinned, the music had faded. The path back through the streets was darker than I expected. I decided to walk back home. It wasn't far, just a few blocks to my cousin's house. The streets were lined with marigold petals, some candles still burning low in front of doors and windows. The night was so quiet, I could hear my own shoes on the cobblestones. And that's when I heard it. Footsteps behind me. But they weren't like normal footsteps. They dragged, slow, uneven, scrape, step, scrape, step. I stopped. The sound stopped. I turned around. The street was empty, just the flicker of candlelight and shadows stretching across the walls. I kept walking, a little faster now. Scrape, step, scrape, step. The sound followed, always the same distance behind me. My chest tightened. I didn't want to run. Something told me not to. But I couldn't keep my pace steady either. My legs moved faster on their own. I turned another corner. Empty street. But the sound was still there. Scrape, step, scrape, step. By the time I reached my cousin's house, my hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the key twice. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, heart pounding. My aunt came out of her room and asked what was wrong. I told her what I'd heard. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded slowly and pointed toward the altar in the corner. A small skeleton figurine sat there, dressed in black, its painted smile catching the candlelight. "Sometimes the dead follow," she said. "They just want to be remembered." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me flinch. And just before dawn, when the house was silent and everyone else was asleep, I heard it again. Not far away, not outside, right beneath my window. Scrape, step, scrape, step. I didn't move. I didn't breathe, because I knew if I looked, I'd see something I could never forget. The cornfield shortcut. I left my friend's Halloween party just after 11. The night had that strange stillness you only get in late October. No crickets, no voices, just the occasional rustle of dry leaves scraping along the sidewalk. I live maybe half an hour away on foot, but I didn't feel like walking the whole route along the main road. Behind the old feed store, there's a cornfield that cuts straight toward my neighborhood. If you go through it, you save at least 20 minutes. I'd heard all the stories, of course. Every kid in town had. People said the rows shifted, that you could get lost in there, that time worked differently inside. But I figured it was just another local legend. The entrance was easy enough, just a gap in the fence where other people had slipped through before me. The stalks swayed in the wind, tall enough to blot out the streetlights behind me. Within a few steps, the world outside vanished. At first, it wasn't bad. The only sounds were my own footsteps and the dry rattle of the stalks brushing against each other. I told myself the shortcut would be quick. 10 minutes, maybe less. But after a while, I noticed I wasn't getting anywhere. No matter how long I walked, the end of the row never came. I turned left. More rows. I turned right. More rows. They all looked the same. Endless walls of corn stretching into blackness. I pulled out my phone. No signal. The battery had dropped from 60% to 30% in just minutes. My chest tightened. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Keeping pace a row or two over. I froze. The sound stopped too. When I moved again, so did it. I whispered hello, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked. The only reply was the dry sound of the stalks. Then, for just a moment, I saw something through the gaps. A figure. Tall. Too tall. Perfectly still, facing me. My stomach twisted. I blinked and it was gone. I tried walking faster, my shoes crunching against the soil. The footsteps followed. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there. The rows around me seemed to close in, narrower, pressing against my shoulders. Finally, I stumbled out onto the road, gasping for air. My legs burned, as if I'd been running for hours. I pulled out my phone. The time read 2:56 a.m. What should have been a 10-minute shortcut had stolen nearly 4 hours. When I turned back, the cornfield looked normal, rows perfectly straight, nothing out of place. But I swear, I could saw the figure, fading deeper into the field. The pumpkin in the window. At the end of my street, There's an old house that's been falling apart since before I was born. The roof is half gone. The porch leans like it's going to give out, and the windows are smashed. Nobody has lived there in decades. But every Halloween night, without fail, a jack-o'-lantern appears in the front window, always lit, always glowing. Nobody in the neighborhood ever admits to putting it there. When I was 17, my friends dared me to go inside and take a picture. I didn't want to, but I said yes, because I didn't want to be the coward. The closer I got, the worse it felt. The yard was overgrown with weeds. The boards on the porch bowed under my weight, and the air smelled damp and sour. When I pushed the door open, the sound of the hinges echoed down the street. Inside, it was worse. The smell of mildew was so strong, I had to cover my mouth. The carpet squished under my shoes, like it was still wet from rain that had leaked through the broken roof. My flashlight showed broken chairs, graffiti on the walls, holes in the ceiling. I kept going until I reached the front room, and that's when I saw it. The pumpkin was sitting on the windowsill, the candle inside flickering weakly. From outside, it probably looked harmless, but up close, it was different. The face wasn't triangles or a silly smile. It looked stretched, twisted, like someone had carved it while staring at a person who was actually screaming. It didn't even look like a pumpkin anymore. It looked like a mask of someone in pain. I lifted my phone to take the picture. The moment I lined up the shot, the candle went out. The room was swallowed in black. I couldn't see my hand in front of me. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, heavy breathing. Right behind me. I froze. My whole body felt like it locked up. I could feel the air shifting, like someone was standing inches from my back. I turned with the flashlight, shaking so badly the beam jumped across the walls. There was nobody there. The room was empty, but the sound didn't stop. It just faded back into the dark, like whoever it was had stepped out of sight. I didn't think. I ran. I sprinted out the door, down the street, not caring if the floor collapsed under me. By the time I got to my friends, I was out of breath, drenched in sweat. They laughed at me, called me a coward, told me I made it up. Then I showed them my phone. In my gallery, there was a photo. The pumpkin was glowing again, just like before. Only the carving wasn't the one I saw with my own eyes. It was different. 2 round eyes and a wide grin. The kind of face kids carve. But I swear to this day, that's not the face I saw in that window. The costume. Every year our town runs a Halloween fair. It's small. A few rides, food stands, and a haunted house they throw together inside an old warehouse near the edge of town. They ask for volunteers to dress up. So that year, I signed up. Easy money, I thought. They gave us cheap costumes, plastic masks, black cloaks, a little fake blood. Nothing fancy. My job was simple. Wait near the end of the maze and jump out at people as they passed. The first hour went fine. People screamed, laughed, moved on. Then around 9, I heard someone call my name. Not the fake character name. My real name. I thought it was one of the other volunteers messing with me. So I turned. Someone was standing in the corner of the maze. At first, I thought it was just another actor. But the mask was wrong. It wasn't one of the dollar store ones they gave us. It was pale, smooth, almost like porcelain. 2 black holes where the eyes should have been. No straps, no edges. It didn't look like something you wore. It looked like a face. The figure didn't move at first. Then it stepped closer. The way it dragged its feet across the floor made my stomach turn. It tilted its head and called my name again, like it had been saying it for years. and then it held something out to me. Another mask, identical to the one it was wearing. I didn't touch it, but I swear I could feel the cold coming off it from where I stood. I backed away, shoved the emergency exit door open, and walked straight out. I didn't even bother telling the kids in line what happened. I just left. Later that night, I told the organizer I quit. She was confused. Said only 4 volunteers had signed up to work the maze that night. I know what I saw. I counted 5. I didn't tell anyone else what I saw. I didn't want to explain it, and I didn't want them to think I was making it up. But I never volunteered for that haunted house again, and every Halloween since, I stay as far away from it as I can. The house with the black pumpkins. I was 12 the first time I walked all the way down Elm Street on Halloween night. Most kids in the neighborhood wouldn't go near the end of the street. They'd cross over to the other side or turn back, whispering that the last house was cursed. I thought it was just another one of those stories kids made up to scare each other. I didn't believe a word of it. The house itself looked like every haunted house you see in movies, only worse because it was real. The fence leaned forward, half of the boards broken or missing. The porch sagged like it was ready to give way. The windows were covered with old planks, but there was something about them that made you feel like eyes were behind the cracks, watching. What made it stand out that Halloween were the pumpkins. The porch was lined with them, but not the normal kind. These weren't glowing orange with friendly faces. They were painted pitch black, and they didn't look right. The moonlight made them look wet, and the carvings were disturbing. The mouths were cut open too wide, teeth jagged like knives, and the eyes were hacked out unevenly, one always bigger than the other. It felt less like decorations and more like someone was trying to imitate a face and got it horribly wrong. When I finally stepped onto the porch, the smell hit me. It wasn't the usual sweet rot of pumpkins left too long. This was different. Sharp, sour, almost chemical, like cleaning fluid mixed with decay. It clung to the back of my throat and made me swallow hard. My friends were standing at the sidewalk, yelling at me to hurry up and knock. My heart was pounding so hard it made my chest hurt, but I couldn't back out. I raised my hand and knocked 3 times on the door. The sound echoed inside, like the house was hollow. For a few seconds, nothing happened. I was about to turn and run when the door creaked open by itself. The hallway inside was wrong. It looked too long, stretching into shadows that swallowed everything at the end. Both sides were lined with more of those black, rotting pumpkins. They weren't lit, but the hollow faces didn't look empty. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the hall, just barely visible in the dim light, something was standing there. Tall, still. I couldn't make out its face, or if it even had one. But every pumpkin seemed angled toward it, their carved mouths twisted like they were grinning for it. I stood frozen, my body locked in place. And then, slowly, the figure tilted its head to the side. That tiny movement made my stomach drop. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my imagination. Something was there. That broke me. I spun around and ran so fast I nearly tripped over the steps. I didn't stop until I was standing under the streetlight where my friends were waiting. They laughed, said I'd chickened out, said the house had been empty for years. But the next morning, I went back. The porch was bare. No pumpkins, no smell, no sign that anything had been there the night before. The boards on the windows looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. And yet, every Halloween since, Whenever I walk past the end of Elm Street, the air changes. The street goes quiet. My skin crawls. And I know if I ever set foot on that porch again, whatever was standing in that hallway will be waiting for me. The car that wouldn't pass. I was 17 when it happened. Halloween night, just after midnight. I'd stayed at a friend's house too long, and instead of calling my parents, I decided to walk home. It wasn't far, just a few blocks down Elm Street. I'd done it before. The street was empty. Houses that had been lit up with jack-o'-lanterns earlier were now dark, their decorations sagging in the cold air. The only sound was the crunch of leaves under my shoes. I remembered thinking how still everything felt, like the neighborhood had gone dead the moment Halloween was over. That's when I heard the low growl of an engine behind me. I turned my head and saw headlights creeping up the road. At first, I didn't think much of it, but the car didn't pass me. It just rolled along slowly, keeping a steady distance. I stepped off the road onto the sidewalk to give it room. Instead of speeding up, the car slowed even more. I stopped walking. The car stopped too. My chest tightened. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I forced myself to keep moving, trying to ignore it, but every step I took, the car rolled forward to match. Tires barely heard against the asphalt, never more than 30 feet back. By the time I reached the halfway point of the street, I couldn't take it anymore. I spun around, ready to yell at whoever was screwing with me. The car idled just a few yards away, headlights burning into my eyes. It looked normal enough, a dark sedan, nothing special. But as my vision adjusted, I saw it. The driver's seat was empty, the passenger seat too. The whole front of the car was vacant. The wheel twitched slightly, just enough for me to notice it wasn't locked in place. The engine revved low, steady, like someone had their foot on the pedal, but there was no one behind the glass. I stood there frozen, staring into the empty car, my breath clouding the air. For a second, I thought maybe someone was crouched down out of sight. The car jerked forward, just a few feet, but it was enough. I stumbled back onto the sidewalk, panic surging through me. Then it rolled again, slow and steady, closing the distance like it had decided I'd stood still for too long. That broke me. I turned and ran as fast as I could. The engine roared behind me. Tires screeched as the car picked up speed, not rushing to hit me, but pacing me. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, the headlights stayed the same distance away, flooding the street, stretching my shadow long across the road. It wasn't trying to run me down. It was following me, herding me. I cut across a front lawn, vaulting over a hedge, and sprinted toward the next block, where porch lights were still glowing. My legs felt like they were going to give out, but I didn't stop until I reached a lit house. I ran up to the porch, ready to bang on the door. When I finally turned back, the street was empty. No car, no headlights, no sound, just stillness. I stood there shaking, too scared to walk the rest of the way home. Eventually, I called my dad to pick me up. I didn't tell him the truth, just said I got spooked walking alone. But the memory never left. The sound of that engine, the way the wheel twitched, the feeling that whatever was inside that car wanted me to know it could have ended differently if I'd stopped. And every Halloween since, if I find myself walking after dark, I can't help listening for it. The slow roll of tires just behind me. The house party that never happened. I was 19 when it happened. Halloween night. A couple of friends told me about a party on Elm Street. I didn't know who lived there, but that wasn't unusual. Half the time, Word spread about these things without anyone really knowing the host. When I got to the block, I heard the music before I even saw the house. Bass thumping through the ground, voices shouting, people laughing. From the street, the windows glowed orange and red from the lights inside, and silhouettes moved across them, like 100 bodies dancing. It looked alive, too alive for a quiet neighborhood like Elm Street. There were people on the porch when I walked up, or at least, I thought there were. A couple in masks brushed past me as I stepped through the front door, and inside, the place was packed. Costumes everywhere, ghosts, devils, skeletons, all moving through smoke and flashing lights. The air was hot and smelled like sweat, alcohol, and the faint tang of something metallic underneath it all. I remember pushing through the crowd, looking for anyone I recognized. Nobody. Just faces covered in masks, makeup smeared across strangers who didn't speak much, but always seemed to be staring too long before they turned away. I ended up in the kitchen, and that's where I met a guy in a full skeleton suit. The mask covered his face, and when I asked him if he knew the host, he just laughed and handed me a red plastic cup. I don't know what was in it, but it was bitter, sharp, nothing I'd tasted before. He leaned in close and said something I'll never forget. Enjoy the night while it lasts. Parties on Elm Street don't end. I should have left right then. At some point, I must have passed out on the couch, because the next thing I remember, the music was gone. The heat of the crowd was gone. I woke up to silence, shivering because the air was suddenly freezing. The lights were off. The house was dark. I sat up and realized the living room was empty. The floor was covered in dust. Cobwebs hung in the corners. The decorations, the lights, the people, all of it was gone. It looked like no one had lived there in years. Panic hit me, and I bolted for the door. When I stepped outside, the street was silent. No cars, no voices, no one on the porch. Just Elm Street the way it always looked after midnight, dead. I ran until I reached my friend's house and hammered on the door. When he opened it, he looked at me like I'd lost my mind. He swore the house I described had been dark all night. No music, no party, nothing. The next day, I went back. The house was still there, abandoned, windows broken, weeds growing through the steps. But on the porch, sitting by the door, was my red cup, the one I'd been holding when I woke up. I didn't touch it, and I never set foot on Elm Street after dark again. But sometimes, on Halloween night, I hear it. The muffled thump of bass, laughter echoing faintly from that block, like the party is still going on inside. Halloween is supposed to be fun, but not here, not on this street. If you've ever had your own Halloween nightmare, let me know in the comments. Never forget the Phantom Rider. It was Halloween night, the kind where your fingers go numb holding a cup of cider, and the smell of bonfires carries through the air. My friends and I decided to cap the night with the haunted hayride they ran every year at the edge of town. The setup was simple. The wagon was really just a flatbed trailer hitched to a tractor. The floor covered in loose straw, big square hay bales lining the sides for people to sit on. They crammed as many people on as possible. Kids in masks, teenagers laughing too loud, parents pretending not to be cold. You sat shoulder to shoulder, your boots sinking into the straw. When the tractor lurched forward, the chatter died down. The lights of the fairground faded behind us as we rattled down a dirt trail into the woods. Actors jumped out here and there, a plastic chainsaw, a guy in a werewolf mask. Everyone screamed, then laughed. That's how it always went. But about halfway through, something shifted. I felt the straw move under me, like someone had stepped onto the wagon late. It was subtle, just a crunch behind me, the weight of the trailer tilting slightly. I turned my head. At the very back of the wagon, sitting on the edge of a hay bale, was a man I hadn't seen before. He wasn't in costume, no mask, no makeup, no fake blood, just dark clothes, worn and plain. His head bowed slightly. His face was pale, the kind of pale that almost glowed under the lantern light. What unsettled me most was that nobody else seemed to notice. Not the kids right next to him, not the parents across the way. They carried on talking, laughing, sipping cider like he wasn't there at all. I nudged my friend and whispered, "Do you see that guy?" She followed my eyes and frowned. "What guy?" she said. She was looking directly at him, but it was like her eyes slid right past, seeing nothing. I turned back quickly. His head was up now, and he was staring at me. His eyes locked on mine, not blinking. I snapped my head forward, my heart pounding in my throat. I told myself not to look again. I stared at the back of the tractor, at the glow of its taillights, at anything else. But after a few minutes, I couldn't resist. I looked back. He was closer. No one had moved. Nobody shifted. But now he was 2 rows up, perched on another hay bale, his face still locked on mine. My mouth went dry. I nudged my friend again, harder this time, but she just gave me a confused look and shook her head. The wagon bumped hard over a rut. Slowly, I turned. He was sitting next to me. His shoulder brushed mine. His face was inches from mine. His skin was pale, waxy, his lips cracked. His eyes were wide, so close I could see the veins spidering through them. I wanted to scream, to shove him off, to leap from the wagon if I had to. But when I looked around, nobody else reacted. Everyone carried on as if nothing was happening. Kids giggling, parents pointing at the fake props along the trail. Nobody saw him. I turned back. The wagon jolted to a stop. We were back at the fairground. The tractor driver yelled for everyone to climb down. People stood, brushing straw from their clothes, grabbing their kids' hands, laughing about how silly it all was. I glanced at the space next to me. Empty. I searched the crowd as we walked back under the orange Halloween lights. Parents, kids, teenagers, but no man in dark clothes. Not anywhere. That night, when I got home, I shut every curtain and locked every door. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every time I turned my head, every time I walked past a window, I expected to see him sitting there in the dark, still watching me. Whispers in the corn. It was Halloween night, the kind where the cold cuts through your jacket, but everyone's too excited to care. I went with a group of friends to a haunted hayride set up outside of town. Unlike the ones that went into the woods, this one cut straight through a cornfield. The wagon was really just a flatbed trailer pulled by an old tractor. They'd spread straw across the floor, with square bales along the sides for us to sit on. By the time we climbed on, it was packed. Families, kids still in costume, teenagers like us trying to act tougher than we felt. The trail led directly into the corn. The stalks were tall, higher than the wagon, brushing against us as we rolled past. Jack-o'-lanterns had been placed here and there, their light faint and uneven, barely cutting into the dark. At first, it was fun. Actors jumped out from the rows, waving plastic weapons, shouting. Everyone screamed, then laughed, exactly like you'd expect. But about halfway in, the energy shifted. That's when I heard it. At first, it blended with the wind, a soft hiss moving through the stalks. But then I noticed it had rhythm. It wasn't random. It was voices, whispers. I leaned forward, straining to hear, and realized they were everywhere. Dozens of them circling the wagon, rising and falling, but never clear enough to understand. My stomach tightened. I thought maybe the ride had hidden speakers in the corn, some kind of trick. But the sound wasn't even on both sides. It moved, slipped from left to right, closer, then farther away. A girl a few rows ahead clutched her boyfriend's arm and whispered, "Do you hear that?" He nodded, his face pale. That's when I realized the whole wagon had gone silent. Kids stopped laughing. Parents froze mid-sentence. Everyone was listening. Then it cut through, sharp, distinct. Laughter, not loud, not playful, just a faint chuckle, low and close, like someone leaning against the side of the wagon. The driver slowed the tractor, the engine growling. No one moved. The only sound was that laughter, drifting just above the straw floor, like it was right there with us. And then the cold hit, not October chill. Worse, a sudden drop in temperature that made the air feel heavy. My breath came out in white clouds. Goosebumps spread down my arms. Around me, people shifted uncomfortably, rubbing their hands together. You could feel it, something pressing in on all of us. And then, just as suddenly, silence. The whispers, the laughter, gone. No wind in the corn, no sound at all. Just the creak of the wagon and the slow crunch of dirt under the tractor wheels. The driver revved the engine again, but the wagon stayed quiet. Nobody spoke the rest of the ride, not until we came out of the field and saw the lights of the fairground ahead. When we finally climbed off, people scattered fast, like they couldn't wait to get away from each other. My friends tried to laugh it off, but no one really could. We all heard it, and none of us wanted to admit that it hadn't sounded like a trick. The apparition in the woods. It was Halloween night, and I went with a few friends to a hayride we'd never tried before. They said it was the scariest in the area because it went deep into the woods, far past the lights of the fairground. The wagon was just a flatbed trailer with straw on the floor and hay bales along the sides for seats. The crowd piled on, parents with kids still in costume, couples holding hands, groups of teenagers acting tough. The driver revved the old tractor, and we rattled into the trees. At first, it was the usual stuff. A few props nailed to trees. Some guy in a cheap mask jumped out with a fake chainsaw. People screamed, then laughed, exactly like they were supposed to. But the farther we went, the darker it got. The lanterns strung along the trail stopped appearing. The air turned colder, and after a while, no more actors showed up. Just the sound of the tractor, the creak of the wagon, and the wheels crunching over dirt. People started whispering, wondering if something was wrong. I noticed the driver leaning forward on his seat, tense, like he was pushing the tractor harder than he should have to. We were crawling along slower and slower until the wagon shuddered to a stop. That's when I smelled it. Rot. It wasn't faint. It wasn't something you could ignore. It was sharp, sour, overwhelming, like roadkill left in the sun. People covered their noses and mouths. A kid coughed until his mother pulled his hoodie up over his face. Someone called out, "Hey, what's going on?" But the driver didn't answer, and then the headlights caught them. Faces. At first, I thought they were masks nailed to the trees, but they weren't. Dozens of pale faces pressed between the trunks, just far enough back that the light didn't fully reach them. Their eyes were dark pits, but I could feel them staring at us. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They just stood there, a silent wall of faces in the dark. A man on the wagon muttered, "Actors. They've got to be actors." But his voice cracked halfway through. No one laughed. No one said anything back. Because deep down, we all knew these weren't actors. The tractor engine sputtered and died. The headlights dimmed. The wagon creaked as everyone shifted, trying to get away from the edge, pressing in toward the center. Parents clutched their kids. Teenagers grabbed onto each other. The air was freezing now, heavy and wrong, and that smell, that sour, choking rot, was everywhere. For what felt like forever, we just sat there, surrounded by those faces. The silence was unbearable. I could hear the wagon wood groaning under the weight of everyone leaning inward. I could hear a woman sobbing quietly into her scarf. And then someone screamed. It wasn't an actor's scream. It was real, high and sharp, cutting straight through the night. The driver turned the key over and over, the engine coughing, refusing to start. The headlights flickered once, twice, and in that stutter of light, the faces were gone, just trees. The engine finally roared back to life, and the driver slammed the tractor into gear. He didn't slow down again. The wagon bounced hard over ruts and rocks as he pulled us back toward the fairground, faster than he should have been driving, the crowd clutching the hay bales to keep from being thrown. Nobody said a word the entire way back. Not one. When we finally rolled into the glow of the fairground lights, people scrambled off without looking at each other. Parents dragged their kids toward the parking lot. Couples hurried away. My friends and I just stood there for a moment, silent, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. I asked the driver, "What was that out there?" He didn't look at me, didn't even stop walking. He just muttered, "Don't ask," and kept going. That was the last hayride I ever went on, and to this day, when I'm in the woods at night, I half expect to look up and see those faces, waiting in the dark. Halloween hayrides are supposed to be safe scares, masks, costumes, stage tricks. But these stories prove that sometimes, on October 31st, the ride gives you more than you paid for. That's the end of tonight's marathon. 21 stories to set the mood for Halloween. Thanks for watching. No sleep tonight. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It truly helps this channel grow and keep these horror stories coming. Okay, I'll see you in the next video. And until then, sleep well.